Hello, Craig Birch here at the EC Sports and Social Club on the Shell Road in Wolverhampton. We have here a returning hero in Steve Bunce.
Returning hero.
A boxing pundit. Steve, you've had a good time here again tonight, isn't it? I mean, there's a bigger crowd than last time. It's growing all the time and everyone loves to hear you, doesn't it? So.
Well, it is. It's a boxing crowd. So it's a crowd where, and I mean this nicely, you can say to them, you can just say, you know, we'll think about the Conti-Finnegan fight and they know what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
95% of the people here tonight were boxing people, and sometimes you can go to a gig and there's 500 people there and there's only 30 people in there that have a clue about the boxers you're talking about, and probably only 40 people that have ever heard of you.
Yeah.
Everybody in here was a boxing fan, male or female. I mean, there's a woman here, a nurse, who's come here on her own. She's got to get a taxi to the other side of Wolverhampton.
Yeah, the lady we met earlier.
Think about that. I mean, I'm being honest. That's a ridiculous. Who'd have imagined you'd have that? I mean, there were several women here tonight, and at least 2 of them came on their own, just boxing fans from parts of the Black Country. That's sensational, and that's what I think I like about it. And I was sort of getting, I feel like a bit like Elvis in 1970 in Vegas. I feel like I'm going to have a residency. Sort of every 6 weeks I'm going to do a gig here.
Well, and
I hope so.
We're certainly glad to see you, but we started with sort of very poignant news really. Jake LaMotta's passing this week. You know, is the oldest living former world champion at the time, and you told a very good story about him on stage and so on. It'll be sadly missed, Jake, wouldn't it? So.
Yeah, I mean, he's 95 years of age, and it's only been the last 4 or 5, 6 years maybe that he's not been as active as he had been. I mean, certainly in his mid to late 80s, he was still around.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he toured here in 2001, and I think in 2005 he toured Britain.
I saw him at Wolverhampton in 2010.
2010?
No, sorry, 2012 that was.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you what, I didn't know.
He was 90 then.
I didn't think. I thought he stopped. So there we go. So certainly in the last, not the last 5 years, but in the 10 years before that, he toured a lot. I did a couple of bits and pieces with him, and I had a couple of magnificent nights with him in New York. One in 2001 and one in about 1998. Exceptional, funny, bizarre nights. I mean, the man had 106 fights, 7 wives, went to prison so long ago that he served, once he was in prison, he was in a chain gang. Yeah. I mean, you can't invent.
Just explain what a chain gang is.
A chain gang is it's a group of prisoners that are then sent out from the prison to work on public roads, to clean public roads, basically pick up the debris, move the bushes back, and to make sure they don't abscond, they're chained to each other. I mean, it's like something from the 50s, because that's when he went to prison.
Yeah, precisely.
A chain gang. I mean, just the expression just sounds ancient. So that's how old he was, and of course his life changed in late 70s and 1981 when the movie Raging Bull came out with Martin Scorsese directing, and of course Joe Pesci playing Jake LaMotta's younger brother, and Robert De Niro playing Jake LaMotta, a film that won all sorts of Oscars and revolutionised in some ways cinema, not just boxing films, but cinema. And that movie changed Jake's life, because up until that point he'd been working in some very, some very rough bars. Salubrious bars in Miami. He went to prison actually for pimping, and that changed his life because he became a celebrity after that. And then of course he started to retell his story, which was such a fabulous backstory. And who knows, I mean, I know talking to you earlier on, what's going to happen now with Raging Bull 2. Yeah, there's so much stuff left out.
They can't call it Raging Bull, basically. They've got to call it the Bronx Bull, haven't they? Which is probably a little bit more fitting.
I've called him, in the Independent, I've called him the Aging Bull.
Yeah.
Which kind of I thought was quite, mildly clever.
Yeah, well, you are marvellously clever in the Independent, Steve, that's what he said.
Sure.
But obviously, it is a good question that we probably not touched on. Is Raging Bull the best boxing film ever?
Yeah, I think it is. I'm not, believe it or not, and don't.
We talked about Rocky. We talked. We've not talked about a few of the modern day contemporaries.
I'm in that rare club that isn't bowled over by the fight scenes in Raging Bull. I think they're good, and I understand what he was doing with the stylised camera shots and the black and white, obviously, to portray the time. But I don't necessarily think that's the greatest boxing. I'll tell you what the greatest boxing scene in movie or TV was an old edition of The Saint. You remember there's a programme in the 60s called The Saint. Roger Moore was The Saint before he became 007. And in this particular episode of The Saint, Roger Moore is involved in boxing somehow, and the boxer's a guy called Nosha Powell. and it's the best. And he fights a guy who I think's an Argentinian, or the Argentinian heavyweight champion. It's the best fight scene on film ever, and I think it was simply the episode was called The Saint. Go Google it.
Who was in that? Because that's starting to ring a bell a little bit.
It's, it was Nosha the boxer.
It was either the Saint or Minder. I think it was Denzel when he falls on horses.
No, it was. Oh, you think someone from later? No, maybe George Cole, because George Cole was in loads of things.
Could have been
in the 50s.
Yeah.
So The Saint. With what's his face, Roger Moore playing Simon Templar was his name.
Yes, Simon Templar. They made it into a modern day film with Val Kilmer, who played Batman.
Disgraceful.
That was.
Anyway, that's not really. Let's crack on.
It's supposed to be Jake's tribute here. Jake, obviously one of the best chins going, and if you looked at his career the way he lived it, no one would ever have thought he'd have lived to 95 years old the way he lived his life, would you?
No. You know, you think about it now.
He's a freak of humanity, isn't he? Really?
Yeah, I mean he was, which is why he could withstand some of the beatings he had to withstand. So yes, he is a freak of humanity.
Yeah.
Jake LaMotta.
Jake LaMotta. So Jake LaMotta, I remember playing a computer game where it had all the top greats in the world, and one of the few, there was 2 fighters from that day. There was Jake LaMotta, there was Sugar Ray Robinson, and that's the legacy. They were the 2 best middleweights at that time. They were the 4 kings of that era, weren't they?
Yeah, they were the 4 kings. Fought each other 6 times. Jake LaMotta inflicted the first ever defeat that Sugar Ray Robinson endured, and Sugar Ray Robinson in 1951 in Chicago in a fight dubbed the St. Valentine's Day Massacre took LaMotta's title in, I think, the 14th round, might have been the 15th, I think it was the 14th. They shared history, and LaMotta considered Robinson a great guy, quote unquote a stand-up guy.
Yeah, and also as well, he did, obviously when he invited him on for those shots and that, you were pretty convinced after spending time with Jake that wasn't the case, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't. So in the movie, Robert De Niro's taunting and insulting Robinson in that fight, the final fight in 1951, and I didn't think anything of it, I'll be absolutely honest with you. And then when I had a particular meal with Jake LaMotta in 2001 in a restaurant in New York City, he was quite upset with the film, and I thought, oh, this is interesting, what's he going to say? And he said, no, it's not what you think it's going to be. It's because I never taunted. I had too much respect for Sugar, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Lovely line.
One last question. He had a reason not to like Robert De Niro as well. Is that something we can talk about on camera?
Well, he told me, and it was in the Observer in 2001, and it's going to be in the Independent in September. He told me that when he was filming and Robert De Niro had to get into character, so he went to meet Vicky, I think her name was, which was to LaMotta's first wife, who was the only woman he was ever really truly in love with. He managed to marry 7
yeah,
women.
We remember from the film.
Absolutely, and she was a gorgeous woman in the film. She was a gorgeous woman in life, and in fact in 1951 she posed semi-nude for when she was 51, excuse me, she posed nude for Playboy. So she was a fabulous looking woman, and De Niro said without a doubt, so not De Niro, he said to me, LaMotta, that he was upset with De Niro, and that's because he slept with her.
Oh.
There's research and there's research, brother. That was pushing it.
Okay. Where does Jake LaMotta rank amongst the great then? That's the last.
Listen, let's be absolutely honest. You know, he was one of those middleweights that could compete in any era. But my gut feeling is he'd have 6 fights with Sugar Ray Robinson, he'd have 6 fights with Golovkin, he'd have 6 fights with Saul Canelo Alvarez, 6 fights with Carlos Monzon, 6 fights with Marvin Hagler, and he would always lose at least 4 or 5 of the 6. So he is a competitor. He's tough, he's hard. Does he make the top 10 middleweights of all time? Probably does, but boy oh boy, the 6 or 7 or 8 above him, they're some of the greatest fighters in history, not just the greatest middleweights in history.
Excellent, fantastic. RIP to Jake LaMotta, a legend. We've certainly paid tribute to you tonight, and Steve, thank you for your time. I'll see you again.
My pleasure.